Let me announce the whole program of this session. That is, first, poetry of Ghulam Faber, which he himself will recite here. Then, poetry of Naval Fishman from US. That will be done by Aparna Mohanty. Have you got the latest program? Yes. So you just see the file. Yes, Naval Fishman's poem we have to recite here. Then Lalan Fakir's poem, translated by Muchkund Dubbe, they will be presented here by Kunjo Bihari Upadhyay. Lastly, Swaraj Ravi's poem to be recited here by Vijay Upadhyay. Sir Mahapatra has not come. Lastly, Liu Jiao, Chinese poet, it will be presented here by Manoranjan Man. This is the session. Okay. Poetry by Satchidanand will be presented here by Rajkumar. So I think all of the
please come
contenders can come here. Rajkumar, Aparna, Kunjo Upadhyay, Rajkumar I have told. Manoranjan Mahanti is here. Aparna Mohanty. Sarola is not there. Who's going to there? What's this?
Okay, we have a very interesting session lined up. It is called Glimpses of World Poetry. Indeed, we have glimpses because we can't claim to have people from all continents or many countries, but we have some glimpses. We'll start with the European flavor, French poetry, and then you know what is coming. An American feminist poet, Naval Fishman. Unfortunately, her father is critically ill in the hospital. That's why she has not been able to come. And she sent her poems, and I hope you have them to read. And she has promised to come to the next one. You know, she is so committed to this initiative. And then we will come to a Chinese poet, Liu Xiaopo, who got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. And quite coincidentally, I had picked up this in English from New York. June 4th elegy. June 4th, Tiananmen massacre took place in 1989. And Liu Xiaopo wrote many poems, but recently on the anniversary of June 4th, he writes one poem also. So they are put together here in Chinese and English. And I was surprised that the whole book has been translated into French by no other person than Ghulam Faber himself. So we will also read that will be the last. So French, American, Chinese, and Indian and Odia all together. So we begin with Ghulam. Ghulam has been introduced in the morning. It's really a great pleasure to have a scholar like him. He is a very important social scientist of Europe, famous for his work on Chinese political economy, but equally famous as a poet who has several volumes of poetry in French, but also translated classical Chinese poetry into French. So it was quite a pleasure to, quite a privilege to have him here. He arranged his whole program to be able to come here. So he will now read his poetry or ask it to be read by somebody, and he will read it in French and also speak to us about his poetry and the European poetic scene. Ghulam.
Thank you.
you, Mano. I'm not a famous poet, and I would say I completely agree with Jayanta Mahapatra that it's quite. I have a kind of. I don't like to be called a poet. You see, I don't know what it means. I write poetry sometimes when it comes from inner necessity and with a lot of spaces of silence. And that makes me think that there is no real definition of poetry because it's not a concept. There are experiences of poetry. And so, the definitions, there are thousands of definitions of poetry which correspond to each poet practice, in fact. Most of the definitions, there was a book which was made recently by a French poet which is called 1000 Definitions of Poetry, where he just put together, you see, the most famous poets, not only French, but also American, Indians, poets from everywhere. And so they tried to define poetry. And most of the definitions were quite paradoxes, you see, such as words that listen, you see, so they were made of paradox. But one thing is certain about poetry is that, in my point of view, it's that it comes from wound. It's very linked with suffering. And suffering, we are all, you see, all kinds of suffering. And it's very linked also with the feeling of humanity. I would say that in the Occidental tradition, as well as in the Chinese tradition, you find this same source. And I would paraphrase as a definition of poetry the famous word about lucidity, the famous definition of lucidity by the poet René Char. He said that lucidity is a wand nearest from the sun. And I would say that poetry is a wand nearest from the sun. Or wand, like a wand, nearest wand from the sun.
From the sun.
From the sun, yes. So it's because it gives you light. So in a way, poetry understood like this is as in the Western tradition. You see, you have the Orpheus myth, where Orpheus comes out of the Inferno, and so he begins to he tries to find his love in the Inferno. So he goes in the Inferno, and then you see he loses his love, and then he begins to compose poetry, and that is listened by even animals. You see, he can captivate anyone. Okay, and so it's the same tradition as in Dante. You see the famous Dante, where it begins with a fall in the Inferno, you see, and then a kind of renaissance. And I would say that poetry has this capacity to give you a kind of rebirth and to heal wounds, at least to heal wounds. And I would just use, you see, the famous reflection of Adorno. You say, the philosopher Adorno, he said, after Auschwitz, it is impossible to write poetry. And it was, of course, completely disqualified by the poet Paul Celan, who was a rescued from Auschwitz and who was one of the most brightest poets of this 20th century. He used to write in German. He was a rescued from Auschwitz, and his poems are completely linked with this kind of suffering. You see, it's Totenfugen. This is a very famous poem about, you see, the concentration camps. And this reflection about poetry at this kind of, according to me, has got a kind of fragile power. You see, to reconcile ourselves with life and to heal wounds. Even in the, in the deepest despairing situations. So where we have seen all these situations, hunger, death, you see all these kind of things, which are the most extreme situation. And there is a reflection about it in Umberto, not in Umberto Eco, but one of the most, also one of the Italian author who wrote about concentration camp. You see, see if it's a man. No, an Italian writer who was also in Auschwitz and who wrote about the concentration camp. And he wrote a very famous book, and he said that during the camps, one day he was bringing back, you see, food to a camp, and with an Italian, with a French colleague, and they together, you see, they began to recite Dante, one song of the Inferno of Dante. And they were completely, you see, in this situation, they were completely like elevated. They didn't think anymore about the camp for 1 or 2 hours, because they were just reciting, you see, this poetry, which was about Inferno. And they were in Inferno. But so the power of words, you see, is a strange power, because it can heal our wounds, and it's very mysterious. But I think that it needs some reflection. And I would recall that in the Chinese tradition, it's exactly the same thing. Look at the greatest Chinese poets, Li Bai, Du Fu. For Du Fu, you see, poetry is a kind of consolation about his life. For Li Bai also, who was a more adventurous personage than Du Fu, but for Su Tongpo, who is one of the major poets of the Song dynasty in the 11th century, he lived about a third of his life in exile, in the worst situation. He was completely deprived of all his official position and of all his salaries, and he had to just to live by plugging the earth. And that's at the time where he wrote his most famous poems. So he founded the energy, he risked through poetry, you see. So I think this is a very mysterious power, but when poetry comes from the inner necessity, you see, it's necessarily something which is not at all. I completely agree with what was said this morning about Shelley, that poetry is in everyone, you see. Because in the tradition, when we have to look 2,000 years before, or maybe 3,000 years before, when poetry was not a kind of elitist or something that tended to become in the academic circles or these kind of things, but 2,000 years back, poetry was shared, or 1,000 years back, was shared by everyone with in the epic tradition, and the way that people listened to poetry was a way to communicate between themselves, because it was like a sacred words, you see. And in the Chinese tradition too, we have the same definition. You see, the definition of poetry, the character which defines poetry. You can write, the etymology of this character is like sacred word. Word and temple. You have word and temple in the same, you see, for composing the same. So it's a few reflections about poetry, which are still valuable also for the actual poetry in the Occidental world. It's not big when you look at what is in fact in the American tradition. Okay, look at Kaddish by Allen Ginsberg. Look at all these things. This is made of sufferings. All these great poems also are made of sufferings, are completely composed through this kind of association, but suffering is bypassed by imagination. Is bypassed is overcome by imagination. You see, or when you find ways to just to express your suffering, well, you find a way to distance, to get a distance from it. So it gives you strength, and it transforms your weakness into a new strength. Or I wouldn't say it in terms of weakness or strength, but in terms of energy. Energy. It gives you energy. Another energy to live on. And well, once I just take a few words just to present my poetry maybe, and some of my poetry are short poems. Some poems are short, but I also like to write long poems. Because when I write long poems, it's like you will see, like the one I'm going to present. It's like a kind of journey, you see, like a kind of journey. But this journey is made by the alternance of days and nights, as in the actual life. We dream, and we are awake. And my poetry is made by a mixing, you see, of dreams and feelings of to be awake, and from memories and dreams, you see. And it's mixed in a way that you cannot exactly know when you're awake or you're dreaming, you see. But anyway, that's like when you make a journey, you see, a long journey. So, and the journey symbolizes also life. Life is just like a big movie, you see, or like when you take Shakespeare's definition, you remember at the end of Macbeth. So, we can maybe read the poem. I shall read it in French. And
House of Light?
House of Light, yes. This poem was, I began to write it, and then you will see very strangely, the first poem I have written finally as if it was a woman speaking. So I will speak it. We will alternate maybe.
Yeah, one there, one there.
One there.
You
I yes, okay. And I read it in French, and then you read it every.
Stanza.
Yes. Heure de lumière. This is the title. Hours of Light. Sommet caché de l'autre. Je ne vois que l'obscur ornement flottant sur son cou face au vent. La poussière m'a laissé seule, vivante au-delà des mers. La patiente usée par l'absence.
House of Light, the title. Hidden summit of the other, only the dark ornament visible, waving in the wind around his neck. The dusk has left me alone, living beyond disease, patience worn down by absence.
Voici que des ombres s'agitent au fond de ma nuit blessée. Les fauves ont dévoré les rêves. Il ne reste que proie cendrée, cependant que l'enfant me révèle.
Now this dance of shadows in the depths of my wounded night. Wild beasts have devoured the dreams. Prey reduces to ashes while the child reveals me.
Des salles sans utilité. Un enchevêtrement de pièces obscures donnant sur un puits de lumière. La présence lointaine de mon premier amour qui me porte en ses bras, ce musée du temps que la nuit couve sous les griffes d'étranges chats tigrés.
Halls without purpose, tangled web of darkened rooms, giving unto a well of light, distant presence of my first love, carrying me in his arms, this museum of time where darkness broods, beneath the claws of strange, striped cats.
Le soleil nu d'hiver se confondait dans l'ombre. Les platanes écorchés sous le ciel pur ouvraient le chemin de nos vies. Les poings serrés j'allais vers la rivière. Tous ces cris se noyaient dans l'éblouissement des eaux. La pierre et le lézard soulignaient le passage face au reste du port ruiné.
Raw winter sun mingled with shadows, bare plane trees beneath a pure sky, opening the pathways of our lives. And with clenched fists I went down to the river, cloud of cries drowning in the dazzling waters, while stone and lizards outlined the passage, facing the remains of the ruined boat.
S'inviter le dégel sous le ciel des regards, cet élan sourd me portant vers les fruits, s'inviter seuls les visages nus, l'intensité de nos rires, de nos peurs.
Came the thaw with the salt of watching eyes, this muffled surge that bore me towards the fruit. Came only those with paired faces, intense our language, intense our fears.
Ainsi flottaient ces souvenirs du haut de la roche enflammée, le couchant célébrait ses noces sur ma peau, violente, convulsive, dans l'immensité. Et la nuit réfugiée en la chaleur des murs, de musique d'ailleurs lointaine, je vivais lentement ces heures de lumière.
Strands of memory floating from the burnished rock on high, sunset spreading this sensual blaze across my skin, our wedding a flame of violent convulsions and vastness. Darkness withdrawn into the heart of walls, distant music from strange lands, and I living slowly these hours of light.
La bibliothèque était une nacelle visitée par les ondes de pays inconnus qui peuplaient l'air de songe. Dehors, le firmament glacé, sans lune, déployait ses hauts vents.
The library a cradle washed by the waves of foreign lands, filling the air with dreams, outside the moonless skies spreading the billows of its ice-cold winds.
La nuit, ainsi livrée aux morts, au souffle de la chair passagère, aveugle, tâtonnant parmi les ombres, les figures croisées se figeaient dans l'insomnie. Au sommet du plateau, la ferme occupée cette nuit, encerclée par les vents d'attente. Et partout des vivants, je sentais la douleur, comme noyé sur une côte obscure, vitrifié, n'ayant plus droit aux mots.
Thus was night given over to the dead, to the breath of ephemeral flesh, like a blind man groping through shadows. They encountered caught in the nets of insomnia at the plateau's edge, a farm filling the darkness, encircled by the winds of waiting. And the living all around, I could feel their pain, as though drowned on some sober coast, frozen glass, deprived of words.
J'errais longtemps dans cette nuit, les visages se fermaient, la haine devenait sourire, l'eau charriait des poissons abrutis, un homme s'acharnait sur l'autre à terre, sa complainte monotone l'exilait, le manège sans fin tournait en ce décor de ville d'eau à la lueur de l'aube.
I wandered long in the darkness, the faces were closing, hatred becoming a smile, the water carrying stunned fishes, a man fighting another one on land, his monotonous lament exiling him, and the carousal turning endlessly on the stage of that spa town under the first light of dawn.
Et mes pas me portaient vers la femme et l'enfant nouveau-né, démunis, refusant tout secours. Longtemps j'errai en son visage, jusqu'au ressac des eaux, où l'horizon calme sombrait.
And my steps carried me towards the woman and the newborn child, vulnerable, refusing all help, my gaze wandering over her face as far as the undertow of waters, where the calm horizon was sinking slowly.
Maintenant, je pouvais voir l'ascète, le détaché, le chemin de sa vie, ses heures, ses hauteurs parcourues sans que tremblent mes lèvres, en des falaises sculptées, des grottes entièrement dénudées. La fête des sens devenue douleur, s'imposait la tentation du renoncement de soi-même, à cette heure de pure clarté.
Now I could see the ascetic, his detachment, his life path, his book of hours wide open, the peaks he had crossed but not a tremble on my lips. In chiseled cliffs, caves laid bare, feast of the senses now sheer pain, and the temptation came to me of self-denial in that hour of pure clarity.
Des escaliers longeaient les bassins d'ablution où flottaient des lampes en fleurs. Les visages, la nuit tombée, se croisaient à leurs flammes par les dalles des temples brûlantes du jour passé. Ici, les regards s'élevaient vers le centre, terre de l'essentiel au geste de beauté, les hommes émaciés par le jeûne, le regard aiguisé, lisant dans la transparence des eaux le mouvement des astres, déliés des servitudes du monde, mais esclaves de leur salut.
Flights of stairs alongside the baths, afloat with flower lamps shedding. Light at nightfall, so faces glimpses each other. Across the temple floors still vibrant with daytime heat, all eyes raised towards the center. Land of the sensual, with gestures of beauty. Men of keen gaze grown thin from fasting, reading in the transparent waters the movement of astral bodies, freed of worldly servitude, but slaves to their salvation.
Les hommes encore poursuivant leurs ombres, des tropiques cuivrés jusqu'aux hauteurs de glace, tout un peuple transfiguré vivant en sa chair le passage vers les ténèbres du long fleuve.
Men still chasing their shadows from the burnished tropics of glacial heights, the whole people transfigured, living in the flesh, the passage towards the dark holes of the great river.
Tout un peuple, aux nuits cannibales, aux festins rapaces inondés de spectres de lumière, en ce réseau de caves abandonnées, des femmes dévêtues, des hommes aux membres tannés, découvrés, soupirant, les jeux de miroir.
A whole crowd of people, cannibal nights, rapacious feasting steeped in spectral light, in this network of abandoned caves, women stripped naked, men with withered limbs, sighing as they discover the play of mirrors.
Ainsi, au comble de la nuit, retrouvai-je tes yeux, si proches de mon souffle brisé, et parcouru ces terres rouges, sondé leurs horizons, leurs poussières, repuiser en toi la beauté, en ces eaux où je m'abandonnais vibrante, dans l'extase de ton parfum m'envahissant de toutes parts.
Then at night's zenith I met your gaze again, so close to my gasping breath. After crossing the red lands, searching the horizons their dust, and now I could drink your beauty once more. Hers in these waters I abandoned myself to the bliss of you, your scent, vibrant, overwhelmed.
Les couleurs du ciel renaissaient sous le flux continu des cascades, épanchant la soif de ta peau. Ici-bas, le chant du loriot, le souffle caché de tes mains. Ici, la voix portée à son extrême, l'arbre rayonnant de lumière, isolé sur le haut plateau.
Color renewed in the heavens under the constant flow of waterfalls, gushing to quench my thirst for your skin, and here on earth the golden oriole's song, the hidden breath of your hands, here the voice carried to its furthest note, a single tree radiating light high up on the plateau.
La vérité des sens à nouveau enflammait ma nuit, tandis que derrière le voile, deux voix émues se chevauchaient, que nul ne pouvait distinguer, leur stance prononcée sans visage.
The true language of the senses set my nights ablaze, while behind the veil two moving voices overlapped, so none could distinguish the poems pronounced without any face.
Ainsi, nu, humant l'écho de tes hanches animales, je m'oubliais dans l'infini.
And so naked, inhaling the drifting scent of your animal hips, I lost myself in infinity.
Parfois, je retrouvais la grande salle où se distribuaient les rôles, les masques du destin. Le visage maternel riait à gorge déployée, rajeuni, assénait quelques vérités sur l'absurdité de mes tâches. En d'autres temps, nous dévalions les pentes d'un cirque situé je ne sais où. Confinés en des salles obscures, assistions aux récits de femmes alarmées.
Sometimes I went back to the large hall where roles were given out, the masks of destiny, the mother's smiling face, and throaty laughter, a younger self dealing out the truth about the absurdity of my tasks. At other times, we could run down the slopes of a lost circus, confined within darkened rooms, and listen to the stories of frightened women.
Des voix m'accompagnaient sans cesse en ces parcours de crépuscule, voix d'ombre, glissant le long des remparts et rejoignant le flux des eaux, leur invariance. J'errais dans des villages abandonnés, sertis d'enclos de pierres sèches, tantôt abrités par un couple qui fuyait les regards, tantôt figés sur la falaise d'ocre, à l'écoute des vents des sables. Certaines qu'en ces temps de grand manque, les feux du désordre couvaient.
And always I was accompanied by voices on those twilight meanders, voices of shadows slipping along the ramparts to join the even flowing waters. I would wander through abandoned villages enclosed by dry stone walls, sometimes guarded by a couple who shunned my gaze, sometimes standing still on the oak cliff, listening to winds from the desert, certain in that time of great need, the flames of disorder were lurking.
J'errais encore jusqu'aux confins des vagues. L'homme invalide m'appelait. Je fermais les yeux à ces troubles, à ces relents de haines annoncées qui brutalisaient les visages.
Again I wandered down to the water's edge where the crippled man called me. I closed my eyes on the confusion of these hints of hatred to come, rendering faces bestial, menacing.
Désormais, j'aspirais au grand large, là où les vents sans fin libèrent le regard. Ce chant, nourri de mes entrailles, se noyait au loin dans la houle, rejoignait ses sources premières, les visages emportés par les eaux et leurs cris s'arrachant aux constellations de la nuit.
Henceforth I would seek the wide ocean, go where endless winds would set my gaze free, and this song from my innermost depth would be drowned out in the far-off swell, could join its original source, faces carried off by the waters, their cries, torn from the constellations of night.
Thank you. Your poem illustrated how it is about inner necessity and informed by deep reflection and suffering and in search of life. Thank you very much. We move on to the American feminist poet, who is not here, Nadel Fishman from US. Her poem will be read by Aparna Mahanti, Indian feminist poet.
Good afternoon, everybody. The first poem of Nadel Fishman is Lee Wiggins. This Lee Wiggins, I have not known the meaning of this word. I asked our French poet that it is a cluster of women. Actually, in Odia we can call them Devdasis married to God. They remain outside the church or outside the town, and actually it is a type of brothel. Brothel they remain together and enjoyed by men folk, and it is their agony and their worship. They called us beginners, and Lord knows we are beholden to our benefactors for hearth and home. But what I remember most of that time is how different we all were. People think women in a cloister. are the same, married to God and care little for the outside world. It makes me laugh now to think of it. We had our types, some less contemplative than others, to be sure, but it was not who we were to the outside in blocks that mattered to me. It was who we were to each other. But it was not who we were to outside in blocks that mattered to me. It was who we were to each other. It's suppose it's a glitch now to use the word sisterhood. But then to live independent. To close my door and hear my own voice in my own head. To hear silence of my own making. Then to open my door to green grass. The straight blooming trees in the courtyard and all those other black doors set in their small white dwellings, attached yet separate, encircled by a high white wall, a wall that kept us safe. To hear our individual voices come together in song and prayer in our little chapel, a whole assortment of sound, some deranged to my ear, if I am honest, some glorious. I can't tell you the freedom. To be a man with our own commerce, there were men, yes, workers. They did the heavy lifting, but we did our own hammering too. And plenty of it. They were friendly, but no, we are beyond. The want of men in our lives, can you understand? We had our own lives. We are responsible for our own selves. You can't imagine what it meant then. What women face to outside these walls. Every day, under the thumb of fathers, brothers, husbands, even some sons, God forgive them all. We got things done, what do you think? Made decisions collectively. There was decent stand arguments, but we agreed in the end. Some would be disgruntled occasionally, but it was gotten over eventually. Nothing was insurmountable. Nothing divided us permanently except death. I can give my own comment here. Most often I used to mimic Rousseau and Marx. Rousseau said man is born free, man is born free, but actually is in chains. Marx said proletariats of the world get united, you have nothing to lose but your chains. And I used to say, oh men of the world get united, you have nothing to lose but your sufferings. And this is the theme of this poem, I think. And the second poem, Lady's Slipper. If there were a creator of this universe, and if she were to begin again, here she says the creator of the universe is a lady and she was to begin again. We believe that it is James. If there were a creator of the universe and if she were to begin again, having deemed the first draft, if not a failure, then in need of serious revision, after light cracked its shell, open against the sky, water trickled, then cascaded. From every promontory, air breezed over the forest tops and oceans. When she got down to the minutiae, long before the architecture of a new beginning and new knowledge, there would be many do-overs. The apple's reputation resurrected apart from the snake, and many success to repeat in nature. And above all, she would know the lady's slipper to be among her most perfect designs. And from its pale pink swelling sides, as they curved inwards on their bent way towards a secret center, she would know it to be the template for the part of a woman's body in which her pleasure and her pain coexist.
Thank you very much. Then we have Chandrabhaga Mahapatra. Is he here? No. Poetry of Shailaja Ravi by Vijay Upadhyay. Just
शैलज रवि जी कि आम ओडिया कवितार समस्त को बेस जना दुखर कथा सी आसीपारी ना गोटे कविता आम पाखे अच्छी आम आशा करूँ सी आसवे तेणु गोटे कविता जोटा साहित्य एकाडेमी बही छपाही अंगार गार से पढ़ुची अंगार गार ए सरई घरे रातिटाए बितेला परे कहीं इच्छा हुए के जानी अंगार खंडे धरी मो नाटा भी लिखिदे जीवी ता कांथरे ए सरई घरे रातिटाए बितेला परे कहीं इच्छा हुए के जानी अंगार खंडे धरी मो नाटा भी लिखिदे जीवी ता कांथरे पूर्व पश्चिम उत्तर दक्षिण चारि कांथरे एमिति की कबाट खिड़की छात कोड़ी वर्गारे चढ़ा चढ़ी मोड़ामोड़ी ठेला पेला ना मानकर असंख्य ना लेखाई खड़ी रे अंगार रे अबा इटा मुंडा असंख्य ना बाप ना गाँ ना पोस्ट ऑफिस असंख्य नार यही कानफटा कोलाहल भितरे कौन बा माने हुए आउ गोटे ना छाड़ी जीवारे कौन बा माने हुए प्रसूति वार्ड रो मोटा रजिस्टार रे आउ गोटाए ना चढ़ाइबारे विपुला पृथ्वी निरवधि काल ए ना किंतु धोई है जीवो ए ना किंतु धोई है जीवो आर आषाढ़ को छातरू गलुथिबा पानी छातरू गलुथिबा पानी रे कि आरसन आसिले चून धौला बेल ए ना भी लिभिजीव आउ सबू ना साथी रे सते कौन बा माने हुए नाटाए छाड़ी जीवा एमिति एक अविश्वासी कांथरे तथापि आशा बांधी थाए ए मूढ़ मन भावी थाए एई बाटे एई सन हुए तो चली जाऊ जाऊ आम गाँ सोनिया की शिव एठी अटकी जीव आ हुए तो पार्टी छाए छाए बाहरी पड़ो अरे हे आम दिवा भाई पुअर रवि भी एठी थेला दिनुटाए कि ओड़िए कि क्यों अचिन्हा मनीषटीए निठेई चाहिबो से अक्षर को घड़िए आउ कही उठिबो ये तो मो हस्ताक्षर ए ना निश्चय मो का विपुला पृथ्वी निरवधि काल ए भंगा निर्जन सरई घरे ना मानकर प्रबल कोलाहल ता भितरे ए छोटिया नाटा जात भितरे हजि जाइथिबा पिलाटा परी व्याकुल होई चाहि रहिथिबो आविष्कार करिबाकू निजकू केउ दोसरा आखिरे
थैंक यू वेरी मच या परे के सच्चिदानंदन दुईटा कविता एवं मुरली शिवराम कृष्णन दुईटा कविता इंग्लिश Both are English poets. Murali Sivaramakrishna writes in English, Sachidanandan writes in Malayalam as well as English. Both. Professor Rajkumar will present.
Let me first read K. Sachidanand's poem. The first is called Stammer, and I have chosen those poems which either talks a little about poem or poetry or words which will be relevant to our poetry festival. The first is Stammer. Stammer. Stammer is no handicap. It is a mode of speech. Stammer is the silence that falls between the word and its meaning. Just as lameness is the silence that falls between the word and the deed. Did stammer precede language or succeed it? Is it only a dialect or a language itself? These questions make the linguist stammer. Each time we stammer, we are offering a sacrifice to the god of meanings. When a whole people stammer, stammer becomes their mother tongue, just as it is with us now. God too much have stammer when he created man. That is why all the words of man carry different meanings. That is why everything he utters, from his prayers to his commands, stammers like poetry. Yeah. The second is self, again by K. Sachidanandan, self. My mother did not believe when, in 1945, I appeared to her in a dream and told her I would be born to her the following year. My father recognized me as soon as he saw the mole below my left thumb, but mother believed to the very end that someone else had been born to her masquerading as me. Father and I pleaded with her, but dreams are not reliable witnesses. She went on waiting for that promised son till she died. Only when she was reborn as my daughter did she admit it had really been me. But by then I had begun to doubt it was someone else's heart that was beating within my body. One day I will retrieve my heart, my language too. Now I read Murali Sivaramakrishna's two poems. One is Silverfish. He has given too many poems. One is Ganga, which is running too many pages, and these are the two short poems. Silverfish. This is no fish, no underwater saint, thriving on sugar and saccharin, Lepisma saccharina. Moving to the tune of centuries, wearing time out of the uneasy self, swiveling in the depth force of unread words, searing through agony and anguish, not sparing joy, anger, love, nor even dictionary spreaded by split tail, flying, reaping, battling, chasing, the printed word and silent space, ransacking meaning to the core in one repeat and relish, devouring tiny morsels in the dark, lone, bit by bit in the event of words against time and decay. In no rush either, there is always more, to gather together, forwards and backwards, an argosy of silence, dissecting abacus and alphabet. Even after all lights are turned off, slithering through words in the dark, a large, richly laden repast awaits all times in unread tomes. The second poem is, there are many ways to kill a poet. There are many ways to kill a poet. Very short poem. There are many ways to kill a poet. The best one is to neglect him. There are many ways to kill a poet. The best one is to neglect him. From the wet treetops to monsoon dawns, the brain fever screams in all delirium. The sky glows red and green all night. The sky glows red and green all night. He walks the streets, stands bewitched by the sea, rolls on the lush grass, and lies open-eyed under the rolling sky. You walk beside him in silence. There are many ways to kill a poet, remember. He is naive and like the parrot reading across open skies. This is his green and red mistake. It is easy enough to kill a poet, remember. He hopes in the dark, screams in the night, and keeps wide awake till all the stars go white in a pale blue sky. Thank you.
Great. We now have a very interesting presentation. Lalan Fakir's poems. The late 18th century Baul poet singer. His Bengali poems, the songs, have been translated by Muchkund Dubey, Professor Muchkund Dubey, former Foreign Secretary, and my colleague and President of Council for Social Development, who is otherwise an international relations professor, scholar, and so on. But he has translated many Bengali poems, and he's a fan of Lalan Fakir. And we will have the recordings. These songs have been sung by Saida Parveen. She is the Begum Akhtar of Bangladesh. Begum Akhtar is, of course, dead. Parveen's songs we will play to begin the evening cultural program. But now, Kunja Bihari Upadhyay will read Lalan Fakir's poems in Bengali and Muchkund Dubey's translations in Hindi. And he is a poet and performer himself, artist himself. You know that.
ବାସ୍ତବରେ ଏ ଯେଉଁ ସାଙ୍ଗୀତିକ ଛନ୍ଦରେ ଲେଖା ଗୀତ ଗୁଡ଼ିକୁ ଗାଇବାରେ ସମସ୍ୟା ଅଛି କାରଣ ସିଏ କେମିତି ଛନ୍ଦରେ ତାକୁ ଲେଖିଛନ୍ତି କିଭଳି ଗାଉଥିଲେ ଆବୃତ୍ତି କରୁଥିଲେ ମୁଁ ଜଷ୍ଟ ଏ ଟିକେ ପୂର୍ବରୁ ହିଁ ପାଇଲି ଏଟାକୁ ଏବଂ ଯାହା ମୁଁ ଗୋଟେ ଆନୁମାନିକ ସ୍ୱରରେ ତାକୁ ମୁଁ ଚେଷ୍ଟା କରୁଛି ଗାଇବା ପାଇଁ ସେ କ'ଣ ଆକ୍ଚୁଆଲି କେମିତି ଛନ୍ଦରେ ଲେଖିଛନ୍ତି କେମିତି ଗୀତ ଗାଉଥିଲେ ଆବୃତ୍ତି କରୁଥିଲେ ମୋ ପାଇଁ ଟିକେ ସମସ୍ୟା ଅଛି ତେଣୁ ମୁଁ ଯାହା ତାକୁ ତା ଦେହରୁ ଜାଣିଲି ଯାହା ଦେଖିଲି ମୁଁ ତାକୁ ଗାଉଛି গাইবি নাই জাস্ট আবৃত্তি কলা বলে ঠিক আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে বাড়ির কাছে আর শ্রীনগর সেখানে পড়শি বসত করে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে গেরাম বেড়ে অগাধ পানি নাই কিনারা নাই তরণী পারে বাছা করি দেখবো তারে আমি কেমনে সে থাকাই রে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে কি বলবো পড়শের কথা তার হস্তপদ স্কন্ধ মাথা নাই রে ক্ষণিক থাকে শূন্যের ওপর ক্ষণিক থাকে শূন্যের ওপর ক্ষণিক ভাসেনি রে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে পড়শি যদি আমায় ছুত জমজাত না সকল যেত দূরে পড়শি যদি আমায় ছুত জমজাত না সকল যেত দূরে সে আর লালন এখানে রয় সে আর লালন এখানে রয় থাকে লক্ষ যোজন ফাঁক রে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে মিলন হবে কতদিনে আমার মনের মানুষের সনে, চাতক প্রায় অহর্নিশি চেয়ে আছি কালো শশী, হবে বলে চরণ দাসী, তাই হয় না কপাল গুনে আমার মনের মানুষের সনে। মেঘের বিদ্যুৎ মেঘে যেমন লুকালে না পাই অন্বেষণ, কালারে হারায় তেমন ও রূপ হারিয়ে দর্পণে আমার মনের মানুষের শোনে। যখন এই রূপ স্মরণ হয় থাকে না লোক লজ্জার ভয়, লালন ফকির ভেবে বলে সদাই প্রেম যে করে সেই জানে, আমার মনের মানুষের শোনে, আমার মনের মানুষের শোনে।
সেদিনটা কেবল হিন্দিতে বলবে।
मेरे घर के पास एक गारसी नगर, यहाँ एक बड़सी वसत करे, मैं एक दिन भी ना देख पाया उसे रे, मैं एक दिन भी ना देख पाया उसे रे। गाँव को घेरे अगाध पानी, ना किनारा ना तरनी, उसके मिलन की इच्छा लिए मैं कैसे वहाँ जाऊँ रे, मैं एक दिन भी ना देख पाया उसे रे। क्या बोलूं पड़ोसी की कथा, उसका हस्तपद स्कंध माथा नहीं रे, क्या बोलूं पड़ोसी कथा, उसका हस्तपद स्कंध माथा नहीं रे। क्षणिक रहे शून्य ऊपर, क्षणिक डूबे नीरे, मैं एक दिन भी न देखे पाया उसे रे, मैं एक दिन भी न देखे पाया उसे रे। पड़ोसी यदि मुझे छूता, यम यातना सब होती दूर रे, वो और लालन एक जगह बसे, फिर भी लक्ष्य यजन दूर रे, मैं एक दिन भी ना देखे पाया उसे रे, मैं एक दिन भी ना देख पाया उसे रे।
You know, this particular song about recognizing your neighbor, that I was missing my neighbor and the true characteristics of my neighbor. And then I began to realize the identity of the neighbor. So it's about plurality, diversity, recognition about different existences around us and relating to them. Thank you very much. Now we have, you want to read the Chinese? I just read the English.
At least we can hear the Chinese.
Yeah.
Sound is different.
Now the you see, as I said, Liu Xiaopo, he lives in Beijing. He's 60 this year, but he is in house arrest. Sometimes in the prison, sometimes in house arrest, but has been an on-free man all these years. So I want to read the poem "The Needle." The Needle. Yeah. You know, it's
He has written at every anniversary of the June 4th massacre, he wrote a poem because he was present during the massacre. He was one of the last people who are present in the Tiananmen Square. And his life completely changed after that, with what he said. Then he was in prison for 3 years, then he was freed, Then in the 90s, he spent sometimes in prison, sometimes under surveillance. And finally, in 2008, he was arrested for signing a constitution. You see a petition for a constitution, for a new constitution. And he was condemned for 11 years, and he's now in prison for 11 years, since 2001.
This poem that he wrote in 2009, the 20th anniversary of June 4th. It's called June 4th in My Body. Can you find that? Yeah.
I don't read all the Chinese.
Okay, you just read the.
这个日子以后越来越遥远，但它治愈我，是隐入在身体中的根，是一群失去了孩子的母亲，在为不希望的回望着，她一直在寻找一双手，接替母亲们的工作。
很好，谈念的很清楚，很对，एकदम correct. My pronunciation is not as good as his. Okay, this I consider a universal poem because all those who struggle for civil liberties and democratic rights and people's rights, they suffer from the repression from state and many other forces. And so you will find echoes of our own experiences in this. The day seems more and more distant, and yet for me it remains a needle inside my body. The poem is called June 4th in My Body. Okay? The day seems more and more distant, and yet for me it remains a needle inside my body, remains a crowd of mothers who have lost their children, mending the cruel dream's time of forgetting. It continues to seek willing hands to take over the work of the mothers. There is a society of mothers who have lost their sons on that day. He writes about those mothers, and there is a case study of 155 of those they have documented. And in the preface, he writes about a conversation with someone who has been helping those mothers as society. So so mothers is a capital here, meaning that association of mothers. This needle searches inside my body, often circles the heart's periphery, cautiously listens to the pulse beat, sometimes uses its tip to probe the heart's surface, and kills off the many naive, impulsive desires. This needle that has stayed for so long round the heart's periphery is determined to plunge inside and bring an end to all guilt. But then, just before acting, it hesitates, not daring to move forward. It knows of life's frailty. Can't resist giving a light prick, should leave a little space, a little time for the flow of blood to observe rust traces. This needle, only because willing hands have never yet been found, falters, wavers. The needle's savage nature thirsts to puncture everything. Blood nourishes its point. Its rust traces enter the bloodstream, circulate. bruise the skin blue, bruise purple. This needle stays in the body for the simple reason of seeking the hands that would establish its permanent moral nature. It doesn't permit spineless nerves to spread waves of trembling. The needle tip turns into the watchman of conscience. Fate has given me to it. To die by this needle is a matter of inevitability. As winter gives a water drop to ice, as summer gives an eye to the blazing sun. Now, at this moment, I can feel the sharpness of its point, a point that illuminates the inner organs, a sliding sharpness that purges spinelessness, This needle has adapted to my sleep's wild imaginings and dream state ravings. Last night, woke up to its metallic murmur, a flashing brilliance, as if a rainbow in the body, in a sky thick with dark clouds. Its life lasts longer than my written words. It overflows with vitality, leisurely trawls through the body, each of its inadvertent touches, intensifies its brilliance, its stabbing point, its unswayed legitimacy. Inside my body there is most desolate dead corner, this needle that makes the corpses groan, injects eyes forced shut in the dark night with a visionary light. Sight penetrates everything. Solemn guilt, distressed in the cramped corner, wants to sink into the core of memory, that moment of betrayal, concealing justice in a pretense of excitement. My soul separates from the heart as if a philanderous diseased genitals have defiled purity of night. Such a cold needle, wandering blind, causes blood to congeal into ice. The denounced dead are a looted cemetery. Gravestone candle flames leap into the eyes. Can the needle be melted? Can the needle tip turn into a flame inside the body and warm each gravestone of the night? I wait for those willing hands to stitch the cruel dream with resolute patience and let the needle pierce into the heart's chambers. Body's flesh, sorrow, nerves cry out. Poisoned ideal, sublimated poetry. Poisoned ideal, sublimated poetry. Thank you. Very powerful. You want to read that? Which one?
The elements.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Memoirs of a wooden plank.
Okay.
This one.
I mean,
Memoirs.
we have already
because
had
this
a-
was his last one.
Yes.
For the 20th anniversary. When he was condemned for 10 years or 11 years, he just flew out because these texts were not known.
Yeah.
Left.
Memories of a wooden plank.
It was
Okay.
made for
我是一块布，
我
哎呀
是一块木板，
木板，
一个半混的长方形的木板，被归顺的命运，让我和一个年轻人的相遇，蛋壳和血肉对待，详细的木纹保存了那个被劲爆的黎明。那个被子弹不进射胡同的黎明，
I'm a wooden plank, a 1.5-inch thick rectangular plank. Abandoned to fate, let me and the youth cross paths. Let me and the youth cross paths to confront the tanks with flesh and blood. Delicate grain of wood has preserved the stunned dawn, the forced by bullets into a blind alley dawn. In Chinese, it's fantastic. All those 5 concepts are in very crisp characters. The start. So I'm a wooden plank. That is what has survived, right? A 1.5-inch thick rectangular plank. Because the benches were broken, when the tanks came. So there is a wooden plank. He's talking about that. That is the witness. Witness to this massacre. Yeah. I'm a wooden plank, a 1.5-inch thick rectangular plank. Abandoned to fate, let me and the youth cross paths to confront the tanks with flesh and blood. Delicate grain of wood has preserved the stunned dawn. The forced by bullets into a blind alley. The plank is forced by bullets into a blind alley dawn. It is in that kind of dawn. The alley is, the street is welcoming that kind of a dawn. And what is that street? A forced by bullets into a blind alley. This is translated by a Chinese poet who worked for New York Times and so on, very famous also in English. As Chang'an Avenue shudders, this is the big avenue where Tiananmen Square is. As the Chang'an Avenue shudders, I too tremble. Chained threads crush one of my corners, woody fibers squeeze out, then a rupturing shriek. I want to hide, I want to flee, knowing steel is stronger than me, but I cannot. To the side, nearby, a vague, vicious pile of bodies, and too near to me, a head with a large punctured hole, so deep, so dark, so deep, so dark. The stench of blood soaks through the wood grain, that stuff as snow white as bean curd jelly. What is it? That stuff as snow white as bean curd jelly. What is it? What is it? I don't know. I think he's the braver than me, crushed by the tank. Okay? I think he's braver than me, like the unfeeling stone of my birthplace, like the unfeeling stone of my birthplace. Though he is more fragile than me, suffers more than me, the young sprout I protect, I want to save him. Those who share his fate flee and flee, the faster the better. They are the younger than me, facing the threat of tanks. They are more fragile than me, the farther they flee, the better. Young sprouts yet to mature. Come, already powerless to flee. The youth lies down on my filthy body. I am merely a discarded wooden plank, powerless. Now he is comparing the wooden plank to himself. The powerless to resist the crushing of steel. Still, I want to save you no matter if you are dead or still barely breathing. He wants to say, come, youth, with the large hole blown through your head. Inside your wide open eyes I see wave after wave of steel-raising madness, the soldiers driving the tanks, even younger than you. Come, a moment ago, hand in hand among friends, facing the darkness of cannon and gun, arm-waving youth, close your sky-turned eyes. Use blood, use the brain's whiteness to blind me and your broken-limbed self. Together, tightly together. I want to listen to your heartbeat's last whisper. I want to listen to your heartbeat's last whisper. I want to feel beneath your ruptured skin the cooling blood flow's final, temperate degree, and if possible, take that trace of warmth to your grieving girlfriend. Come, youth. Opening out like the sky, without rain clouds, without birds, if possible, let me carry you back home. And if it's too late, let me simply move, not move, ever so tightly nestle in together, crushed by steel into dust that falls into the fissures of asphalt in Beijing at the entrance to the 6 ministries, that is a building, 6 ministries, into the soil beds along Chang'an Avenue, transforms into perennial spring ivy, preserver of memory. Come, youth, as indomitable as water. If you loved one, agree. Shape me into a crude coffin that accompanies you into the ground. My roots, my family within the depths of the earth accompanies your always open eyes, waiting underground until the day your gaze can fade into the fullness of a forest. You know that there is a big campaign to, no, I think we'll end there. There is a big campaign to review the governmental verdict on Tiananmen. And if not in my lifetime, young people's lifetime, I predict there will be a positive view. The rest of the world has a positive view already of Tiananmen's democracy movement. That socialism is about democracy, more people's rights. And so that view will prevail one day, and Tiananmen uprising will be taken as a positive democratic upsurge to democratize China along socialist lines. So, so in that spirit, we think that Liu Xiaobo's poetry is very relevant to all progressive democratic rights activists. Well, with that, we open. If you have any questions, we have still a few minutes. We can. Okay. All right. Good. We'll end with a lyrical poetry because we have a whole session on songs and theatre and so on. But we will end with that. Yes. But some queries, some questions to favor others. Please. I know we have had just 1.5 hours.
French poetry. In France, what is the poetic trend now?
It's difficult to talk about French poetry in general because you have a lot of schools, I would say there is a critical lyricism. First school is kind of lyricism with a certain distance with old lyricism, and we have new forms also, avant-garde poetry, which is a way performance poetry with performance, which is mainly oral poetry, very linked with also pre-Walching poetry, you see. So this poetry with performance is a new tendency since 20 years. And you have also exploration, formal explorations, all kinds of formal explorations. But in general, it's poetry is not, there are not a lot of followers of poetry. People don't read poetry. Poetry is just maybe less than 1% of the books which are sold. So it's a very small circle of, you see, of people who know each other, who generally know each other. We all know, as the people who write poetry, who go to the same, but it's the only way to develop actually poetry is to make readings, poetry readings. So we multiply poetry readings in order to publicize also and to make known not only the actual poets but also the older poets. So there are some very interesting poets who are not well known, but who have already died, who have died young, and so in this sense, you got a lot of creation, but the public is lacking. That's a problem.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, in that case, we will end with a song by Aparna.
गीतटी अमृता प्रीतमकर अष्टमेध यज्ञ बोली गोटे कविता रिक्रिएशन जहाँ कहते पीताम्बर भी शुणी जेहेतु यहाँ गोटे वर्ल्ड पोएट्री अच्छे मुझे अमृता प्रीतम कवि भाव में बहुत मु सम्मान करे जो फिलिंग एक्चुअली अश्वमेध यज्ञ तो गोटे गद्य कविता किंतु मुझे कविताटी को भाविली गीतर लिखी पूरा गोटे वर्ष मु भाविबा पड़ी पूरा गोटे वर्ष एवं से गीतटी को थे चैत्र पूर्णिमा जस्ट धीरे मुझे आसलु जन्म उठा कहली आज कि तिथि से कहले आज चैत्र पूर्णमी एवं से धड़की जमी कहीं कहला बेले मुझे गीत स्कूटर पछे बसी बोलवा आरंभ कली घरे पहुँचला बेलू गीतटी पूरा बोली सारी लिखिली से प्राय मन रही जाता खाली रिफ्रेश करने गोटे टीवी देती कविताटीर शीर्षक हूँ अश्वमेध यज्ञ आपण आपको शुण मो कंठ एत भल ना तथापि भरा चैत्र पूर्णिमा राते बांधी चैत्र मुकुट माथे दुरंत मोर प्रीतिर बिहरिला अपथे पथे चैत्र पूर्णिमा राते बांधी चैत्र मुकुट माथे दुरंत मोर प्रीतिर बिहरिला अपथे पथे चैत्र पूर्णमी राते दुग्ध धवल तरुरे ताहार सत्यर श्वेत आभा दुग्ध धवल तरुरे ताहार सत्यर श्वेत आभा विरह श्यामल वर्ण रे बेली कर्णता मनलोभा विरह श्यामल वर्ण रे बेली कर्णता मनलोभा थिले प्रेमिक केही समर्थ जितु प्रेमर ए परमार्थ थिले प्रेमिक केही समर्थ जितु प्रेमर ए परमार्थ तार आज्ञा पत्रे लिखिदेली एही आह्वान निज हाते चैत्र पूर्णमी राते स्वदेश कुंज बने केबे अबा विदेशी नदीर तीरे स्वदेश कुंज बने केबे अबा विदेशी नदीर तीरे थमिला जदिबा गति तार काहा आवाहने अति धीरे थमिला जदिबा गति तार काहा आवाहने अति धीरे गाई समर्पणर गीति देई यौवनकु आहुति जाली देली होमानड़ जड़ी गले पतंग आसिले जेते चैत्र पूर्णमी राते আজি বয়সর সন্ধ্যা নইছে আজি বয়সর সন্ধ্যা নইছে কুশলে ফেরিছে অশ্ব আজি বয়সর সন্ধ্যা নইছে কুশলে ফেরিছে অশ্ব অনাহত তার দর্পিত ঠানি নুহে পূর্ণ সে নুহে নিঃস্ব অনাহত তার দর্পিত ঠানি নুহে পূর্ণ সে নুহে নিঃস্ব নাহি পুণ্য লাভর আশা নাহি প্রাপ্তির পিপাসা দিগ্বিজয়ী মো প্রীতি তুরঙ্গ রহিথাউ মোর সাথে চৈত্র পূর্ণমী রাতে অশ্বমেধয়ে যজ্ঞ মহর চিরদিন রহুধা অশ্বমেধয়ে যজ্ঞ মহর চিরদিন রহুধা বাঞ্ছিত তার পূর্ণতা পথে সঞ্চিত যেতে বাধা বাঞ্ছিত তার পূর্ণতা পথে সঞ্চিত যেতে বাধা চমকাই মো হৃদয় বিশ্ব সকুশলে বিচরুয়ে অশ্ব চমকাই মো হৃদয় বিশ্ব সকুশলে বিচরুয়ে অশ্ব লগামহীনতা অক্ষত গ্রীবা ভারি ভাল দিশে মোতে চৈত্র পূর্ণিমা রাতে বান্ধি চৈত্র মুকুট মাথে দুরন্ত মোর প্রীতির বিহরিলা পথে পথে।
Beautiful start of our cultural program. We have already gone to
ये गीत नाच मौज जो अध्यायटा या पर हवा कथा अल्प टिके विश्राम परे सेटा भी बहुत धन्यवाद।